Hello, my friends. Welcome back. I hope you are having a peaceful day. Have you ever dreamed of traveling to a place so far away that it felt like another world? Have you ever believed in something so strongly that you were willing to risk everything for it? And what would you do if people told you that your dream was impossible? Today, we are going to learn English through the incredible story of Hudson Taylor, a man who crossed oceans, faced dangers, endured heartbreak, and changed the lives of millions of people in China. His journey was not easy. It was filled with uncertainty. It was filled with sacrifice. And yet, his story remains one of the most inspiring adventures in modern history. If you enjoy learning English through stories like this, please subscribe to our channel. Now, let us travel back nearly 200 years. The year was 1865. In a small town called Barnsley, in northern England, a baby boy was born into an ordinary family. His parents named him James Hudson Taylor. At that moment, he looked like any other child. No one could see the future. No one could know that this little boy would one day travel farther than most people of his time could even imagine. No one knew that his name would become known across another continent. Hudson grew up in a loving home. His father was a pharmacist and also a religious man. His mother was kind, caring, and deeply devoted to her family. The Taylor family was not rich. They lived a simple life, but they valued education, hard work, and faith. From an early age, Hudson listened to stories about distant countries. He heard about places filled with different languages, different cultures, and different traditions. One country captured his imagination more than any other: China. In the 19th century, China seemed incredibly far away. Most people in England knew very little about it. The journey took months. By sea, communication was slow. Maps were incomplete. For many people, China felt almost like another world. Young Hudson listened carefully whenever someone mentioned the country. Without realizing it, a dream was beginning to grow inside him. As Hudson grew older, he became a curious boy. He loved reading books. He enjoyed learning new things. He often spent hours studying and thinking, yet his teenage years were not always easy. Like many young people, he sometimes struggled to find direction. He asked himself important questions. What should he do with his life? What kind of person should he become? What purpose did he have? For a time, he did not have clear answers. But then, something happened. One afternoon, when he was 17 years old, Hudson was alone at home. Looking for something to read, he picked up a religious book. At first, he opened it casually. He had no idea that this simple decision would change his entire future. As he read, he felt deeply moved. The words affected him in a way he had never experienced before. Suddenly, many of the questions that had troubled him seemed clearer. He felt a new sense of purpose. He felt that his life should be dedicated to helping others. Years later, Hudson would remember this moment as one of the most important turning points in his life. But there was a problem. Knowing your purpose and achieving your purpose are very different things. Hudson was only 17. He had no money, no special influence, no important position, just a dream. Most people would have left the dream behind. Most people would have chosen a safer path. Hudson did not. Instead, he began preparing himself. He knew that if he wanted to help people in China, he needed useful skills. So he started studying medicine. Medicine was difficult. The lessons required patience and discipline. There were long hours of study, complex information to learn, many challenges to overcome. Yet Hudson worked harder than ever. At the same time, he began doing something even more unusual. He started learning Chinese. Imagine trying to learn a language completely different from your own. Different sounds, different writing, different grammar, different culture. Many people thought he was wasting his time. After all, he had never even been to China. Some wondered why he was working so hard for a journey that might never happen. But Hudson continued, day after day, week after week, month after month. His dream never left him. Sometimes the path toward a goal is invisible. You cannot see the finish line. You cannot know whether you will succeed. All you can do is take the next step. That is exactly what Hudson Taylor did. While studying medicine, he also trained himself to live simply. He believed that life in China would be difficult. He wanted to prepare. He ate simple meals. He spent very little money. He learned to be comfortable without luxury. His friends probably thought he was strange. Why was this young Englishman preparing for hardships he had never experienced? Why was he making life difficult on purpose? Hudson believed that preparation mattered. He wanted to be ready for whatever challenges awaited him. And challenges were coming. Many people today can travel across the world in less than a day. A flight from London to China takes only hours. But in Hudson's time, things were very different. The trip could take 5 or 6 months. Ships crossed enormous oceans. Storms were common. Accidents happened frequently. Disease spread easily among passengers. Some travelers never reached their destination. Yet Hudson remained determined. By the early 1850s, his plans were becoming reality. Finally, after years of preparation, the opportunity arrived. Hudson was 21 years old. The moment he had dreamed about for years was finally here. He would leave England and travel to China. Can you imagine what that felt like? Standing on a dock, watching workers load supplies onto a ship, listening to the sounds of the harbor, knowing that your life is about to change forever. Hudson said goodbye to his family. These were emotional moments. There were smiles. There were tears. There were hopes and fears. Nobody knew when they would see each other again. In those days, a journey to China was not a short trip. It was a life-changing commitment. As Hudson stepped aboard the ship, he carried very little with him. A few belongings, his knowledge, his determination, and a dream. Slowly, the ship left the harbor. The coastline of England began to disappear. The land of his childhood faded into the distance. Ahead lay thousands of miles of ocean. Ahead lay uncertainty. Ahead lay China. And Hudson Taylor had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him there. Nobody expected what happened next. The voyage would soon test his courage in ways he had never imagined. As the coastline of England slowly disappeared behind him, Hudson stood quietly on the deck of the ship. The cold sea wind touched his face. The waves stretched endlessly in every direction. For the first time, the reality of his decision truly sank in. There was no turning back now. England was behind him. China was ahead of him, and between them lay thousands of miles of open ocean. The voyage began peacefully enough. Day after day, the ship sailed across vast waters. The passengers followed simple routines. They ate meals together. They slept in small cabins. They watched the sea and waited, and waited, and waited. Travel in the 19th century required patience. There were no movies, no smartphones, no internet, no quick updates from family and friends. Sometimes weeks passed with little change, except the movement of the waves and the shifting colors of the sky. Hudson spent much of his time reading, studying Chinese, and preparing himself mentally for the life ahead. He knew that reaching China was only the beginning. The real challenges would come later. But there was a problem. The ocean does not always remain calm. One day, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. The wind became stronger. The waves grew larger. Soon, the ship was being thrown up and down by a powerful storm. Passengers struggled to stand. Furniture slid across the floor. Water crashed against the sides of the vessel. Many people became frightened. Others became seasick. For hours, the storm continued. The crew worked desperately to keep the ship under control. Hudson had never experienced anything like it. The sea seemed endless and powerful. At moments, it felt as if nature itself was testing everyone aboard. However, things soon changed. The storm eventually passed. The dark clouds moved away. The sea became calm again. The passengers breathed a sigh of relief. But the journey was far from over. Weeks later, another dangerous situation appeared. One morning, the crew noticed something alarming. The ship was drifting toward a group of islands. Strong ocean currents were pulling the vessel closer and closer to dangerous rocks. At first, some passengers did not understand the danger, but the sailors knew immediately. If the ship struck the rocks, the consequences could be terrible. The captain gave urgent orders. The crew rushed from place to place. Everyone worked as quickly as possible. Yet there was one major problem. There was almost no wind. Without wind, the sails could not move the ship away from danger. Slowly, the vessel continued drifting toward the rocks. The situation became more serious with every passing minute. The crew grew increasingly worried. Some passengers began praying. Others watched silently. Nobody expected what happened next. The ship came frighteningly close to the rocks. The crew could see waves crashing against them. For a moment, it seemed as though the journey might end right there. Hudson later remembered the fear he felt during those moments. He had dreamed about reaching China for years. Now, it seemed possible that he might never arrive. The future he had imagined could disappear before it even began. Then, suddenly, the wind returned. At first, only a gentle breeze. Then, a stronger wind. The sails filled. The ship slowly changed direction. Little by little, it moved away from the dangerous rocks. The crew celebrated. The passengers felt enormous relief. Disaster had been avoided. Hudson never forgot that experience. It taught him something important. Life does not always go according to plan. Sometimes danger appears unexpectedly. Sometimes success seems impossible. But courage means continuing even when you feel afraid. The voyage continued. Month after month, the ship crossed oceans and passed distant lands. Hudson saw places he had only read about in books. He met people from different cultures. He listened to new languages. Every day reminded him that the world was much larger than he had once imagined. As the weeks passed, excitement began replacing fear. China was getting closer. The dream that had lived in his heart for years was finally becoming reality. Then, one day, the long journey came to an end. Land appeared on the horizon. The passengers rushed to see it. After months surrounded by nothing but sea, the sight of land felt almost magical. Hudson looked toward the distant shoreline. This was China, the country he had dreamed about, the country he had prepared for, the country that would shape the rest of his life. But there was a problem. Arriving in China would prove far more difficult than he expected. The language was different. The culture was different. The food was different. The customs were different. Everything around him felt unfamiliar. And soon Hudson would discover that surviving in China required much more than courage. It required understanding. It required patience. And it required a decision that would shock both the Chinese people and his fellow Europeans. This decision would change everything. Before we continue with Hudson Taylor's incredible journey in China, I would like to ask you something. If you are enjoying this story and learning English with us, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more English learners around the world discover our channel. And if you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe and join our growing community. Also, I would love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, would you be brave enough to leave your country and travel across the world to follow a dream? Now, let's continue our story, because Hudson Taylor's greatest challenges were only just beginning. When Hudson Taylor first arrived in China, he felt a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. For years, he had dreamed about this moment. Now he was finally here. But dreaming about a place and living there are very different things. Everything around him seemed unfamiliar. The streets looked different from those in England. The buildings had different designs. People wore different clothing. The language sounded completely new to his ears. Even simple tasks became difficult. Buying food was not easy. Asking for directions was not easy. Making friends was not easy. Hudson quickly realized that his years of preparation were only the beginning. He still had much to learn. At first, communication was one of his biggest challenges. Although he had studied Chinese before leaving England, speaking with local people was much harder than he expected. Native speakers talked quickly. Different regions had different accents. Many words sounded similar to him. Sometimes, people could not understand what he was trying to say. Sometimes, he could not understand them. These moments were frustrating. But Hudson refused to give up. Every day he practiced. Every day he listened carefully. Every day he learned a little more. Slowly, his confidence began to grow. However, things soon changed. Not long after Hudson arrived, China was experiencing political unrest and social difficulties. Many people were struggling. Some communities were facing poverty. Others were affected by conflict and uncertainty. For a young foreigner who had just arrived, life became even more complicated. Traveling between cities could be difficult and sometimes dangerous. Yet Hudson remained focused on his goal. He wanted to understand the people around him. He wanted to earn their trust, and he wanted to help where he could. Then, Hudson made a decision that surprised many people. At that time, most Europeans living in China dressed like Europeans. They often stayed together and remained separate from local communities. Hudson believed this created a barrier. He thought people would be more comfortable if he respected their culture. So, he began wearing Chinese clothing. He even adopted a traditional hairstyle that was common among Chinese men during that period. Many foreigners were shocked. Some criticized him openly. They thought he was making a mistake. Others laughed at him. But Hudson believed he was doing the right thing. He wanted people to see that he respected them and their traditions. This decision would change everything. When local people saw Hudson making an effort to understand their culture, many became more willing to speak with him. Conversations became easier. Friendships began to grow. Trust developed slowly. Hudson learned an important lesson. People often respond positively when they feel respected and understood. As the months passed, he traveled to different areas and met people from many walks of life. He spoke with merchants. He spoke with farmers. He spoke with families and community leaders. Every conversation taught him something new about China. Every journey expanded his understanding. But there was a problem. Life was not always comfortable. Money was often limited. Hudson sometimes faced financial difficulties. He lived simply and tried to use his resources carefully. There were times when he felt lonely. There were times when he missed his family in England. Letters took months to arrive. Sometimes he waited a very long time for news from home. Imagine being thousands of miles away from everyone you love. Imagine not knowing when the next letter will come. These moments tested Hudson's strength. Yet he continued moving forward. He believed his work had meaning. He believed the challenges were worth facing. Nobody expected what happened next. As Hudson spent more time in China, his connection with the country grew stronger. What had started as a dream was becoming his life's mission. But even greater challenges were waiting ahead. Soon he would face illness, hardship, and difficult decisions that would test his courage more than ever before. And the next chapter of Hudson Taylor's journey would become one of the most important turning points of his entire life. Before we continue, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you're enjoying this story. And tell me in the comments, what do you think was Hudson Taylor's bravest decision so far? As the years passed, Hudson Taylor became more familiar with life in China. The busy streets no longer felt completely strange. The language that once seemed impossible was becoming easier to understand. The culture that had once surprised him was now something he deeply respected. Little by little, China was beginning to feel like home. But there was a problem. The more Hudson traveled, the more he noticed something important. Many foreign workers stayed near large coastal cities. These cities were easier to reach. They had more trade, more visitors, and more connections with the outside world. However, millions of people lived far away from the coast. They lived in villages, towns, and inland regions that few foreigners ever visited. Hudson could not stop thinking about them. Who would help these people? Who would travel to places that were difficult to reach? Who would be willing to leave comfort behind and go deeper into the country? These questions stayed in his mind day and night. The more he thought about them, the stronger his conviction became. He knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to travel inland. He wanted to reach places that many others ignored. But this was not an easy decision. Traveling inland was dangerous. Roads were often poor. Transportation was slow. Communication was limited. Many regions were unfamiliar to foreigners. Friends warned him about the risks. Some people thought his plan was unrealistic. Others believed it was too dangerous. However, Hudson refused to let fear control his future. This decision would change everything. He began making long journeys into the interior of China. Sometimes he traveled by boat along rivers. Sometimes he walked long distances. Sometimes he rode simple local transportation. The journeys were exhausting. Weather conditions could be difficult. Food was sometimes limited. Comfort was rare. Yet, Hudson continued. Every village he visited strengthened his determination. Every person he met reminded him why he had come to China in the first place. Then another challenge appeared. Hudson's health began to suffer. Life in 19th century China could be physically demanding. Medical care was limited in many areas. Diseases were common. Travel placed enormous stress on the body. At times, Hudson became seriously ill. There were days when he felt weak and exhausted. There were moments when continuing seemed almost impossible. Imagine being far from home. Imagine being sick in a place where everything feels unfamiliar. Imagine wondering whether you have the strength to continue. These were very real experiences for Hudson Taylor. Yet, once again, he showed remarkable perseverance. After recovering, he returned to his work. His determination inspired many people around him. They saw that he was willing to face the same hardships as the communities he served. Because of this, respect for him continued to grow. Nobody expected what happened next. As Hudson's reputation spread, more people became interested in his vision. He was no longer thinking only about his own work. He began thinking about something much larger. What if more people came to help? What if teams could work together across China? What if entire regions that had never received support could finally be reached? These ideas eventually led to one of the most important moments of his life. Hudson began planning an organization that would send workers deep into China's interior. This idea seemed extremely ambitious. Many people doubted it would succeed. The costs would be high. The challenges would be enormous. The risks would be real. But Hudson believed the dream was worth pursuing. Slowly, he shared his vision with others. Some listened politely. Some were skeptical. But others became inspired. Little by little, support began to grow. A movement was starting. A movement that would eventually become known around the world. Yet, even as new opportunities appeared, Hudson faced personal struggles. He missed his family. He missed his homeland. There were lonely nights when he wondered what the future would bring. Success did not remove hardship. In many ways, greater responsibility created greater challenges. But Hudson continued moving forward. He understood something important. Great achievements often require patience. They require sacrifice. And they require the courage to keep going when results are still uncertain. As the years passed, his vision became clearer than ever before. He was no longer simply a young man with a dream. He was becoming a leader whose ideas would influence thousands of people across continents. And soon, Hudson Taylor would face the greatest test of his life. The dream he had carried since his youth was about to become much bigger than he ever imagined. Before we continue, if you are enjoying this story, please like this video and share it with a friend who loves history and inspiring stories. And tell me in the comments, would you have been brave enough to travel into unknown regions like Hudson Taylor? As Hudson Taylor's vision grew, he realized that one person alone could never reach all of China. The country was simply too large. Millions of people lived in distant towns and villages. Many regions had very few visitors from outside the country. Hudson knew that if real change was going to happen, more people would need to join the mission. But there was a problem. Finding people willing to leave their homes, travel across the world, and face uncertainty was not easy. Many admired Hudson's work. Few were willing to do it themselves. Yet Hudson refused to give up. He believed that if the vision was important enough, others would eventually see it too. So he shared his dream. He wrote letters. He spoke to supporters. He explained why China's inland provinces mattered. Slowly, people began to listen. Then something remarkable happened. More volunteers stepped forward. Some were doctors. Some were teachers. Some were ordinary people with extraordinary determination. They came from different backgrounds, but they shared a common purpose. Hudson's dream was no longer his alone. It was becoming a movement. In 1865, Hudson founded an organization called the China Inland Mission. This was one of the most important moments of his life. The goal was simple but ambitious. The organization would send workers into parts of China that had received very little outside help. At first, the mission was small. Resources were limited. Money was often scarce. There were many uncertainties. However, things soon changed. As news of the mission spread, support grew. More volunteers joined. More communities became connected. More opportunities appeared. The organization expanded further than many people thought possible. Hudson often reminded his team that patience was important. Great achievements rarely happen overnight. They require years of dedication. They require faith during difficult moments. And difficult moments certainly came. Nobody expected what happened next. While Hudson's work continued to grow, he faced heartbreaking personal losses. His beloved wife, Maria, had been one of his strongest supporters. She had shared his sacrifices. She had endured hardships alongside him. Together, they had faced challenges that many people could hardly imagine. But life in 19th century China was difficult. Illness was common. Medical treatment was limited. Sadly, Maria's health declined. When she passed away, Hudson was devastated. The loss deeply affected him. For a time, grief filled his heart. Imagine losing someone who has shared your dreams, your struggles, and your hopes. Imagine trying to continue your work while carrying such sadness. These were some of the hardest days of Hudson Taylor's life. Many people would have stepped away. Many would have abandoned their mission. But Hudson continued. Not because he was fearless, not because he never felt pain, but because he believed his work still mattered. His story reminds us that courage is not the absence of sadness. Courage is moving forward, even when life becomes difficult. Years passed. The China Inland Mission continued expanding. More workers arrived. More communities were reached. The organization eventually became one of the largest missionary movements in China. Hudson traveled extensively. He encouraged new workers. He helped solve problems. He continued building relationships. His influence reached far beyond the places he personally visited. This decision would change everything. Because Hudson had chosen to respect local culture, many future workers followed his example. Instead of remaining separate from local communities, they learned languages, built friendships, and tried to understand the people around them. This approach helped create stronger connections. It showed that respect and understanding can open doors that force never can. As Hudson grew older, his hair turned gray. The young man who had once stood on a ship leaving England was now an experienced leader. Decades had passed since he first arrived in China. The dream that had once seemed impossible had become reality. Yet Hudson remained humble. He never forgot the struggles of his early years. He never forgot the long voyage. He never forgot the moments when success seemed unlikely. And perhaps that is one reason why people respected him so much. He understood both failure and success. He understood both hardship and hope. By the beginning of the 20th century, Hudson Taylor had become one of the most influential figures connected to China and international mission work. His ideas inspired thousands of people. His organization continued growing. His example encouraged others to serve with compassion and respect. Then, in 1905, Hudson Taylor passed away at the age of 73. His life's journey had come to an end, but his story did not end there. His legacy continued. The organization he founded carried on its work. His writings continued to inspire readers. His example continued to influence future generations. Even today, historians remember Hudson Taylor for his determination, cultural understanding, and willingness to take extraordinary risks for a purpose he believed in. So what can we learn from Hudson Taylor's story? First, we learn that great journeys often begin with a simple dream. When Hudson was a boy in England, nobody could have predicted the future that awaited him. Yet he allowed himself to dream. Second, we learn the value of preparation. Before Hudson traveled to China, he spent years studying, learning, and developing skills. Success rarely happens by accident. Preparation matters. Third, we learn the importance of perseverance. Again and again, Hudson faced obstacles, illness, financial struggles, loneliness, loss, criticism. Yet he continued moving forward. And finally, we learn the power of understanding other people. Hudson believed that respect, kindness, and cultural understanding were essential. His willingness to learn from others helped him build trust and friendship across cultural boundaries. Today, when we learn English, we are doing something similar. We are building bridges. We are connecting with people from different countries and cultures. Sometimes learning English feels difficult. Sometimes progress feels slow. Sometimes mistakes can be frustrating. But remember Hudson Taylor. He spent years learning a language that felt completely unfamiliar. He continued practicing even when it was hard. Step by step, he improved. And you can too. Every new word you learn is progress. Every story you listen to is progress. Every day you practice English is another step forward. Never underestimate the power of small daily improvements. They can eventually lead to extraordinary results. Thank you for listening to this story today. I hope you enjoyed this journey through history and that it helped you with your English learning. If you liked this story, please give it a like. If you want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to our channel. And if you have ideas for other historical stories, please leave a comment below. Until next time, my friends, keep learning, keep listening, and keep enjoying the beautiful journey